Hello, friends. Welcome back to the channel. Thank you for joining me today for another near-death experience interview today with Susan Walter. Susan had two near-death experiences as a young child in which she saw and interacted with her angels. And since she came back, she has had the ability to see into the angelic realm and see angels in their pure light form. Susan is now an intuitive visionary artist, and she uses her abilities to draw your angel portraits and relay messages and insights from your angels. Susan is also the artist and author of the Solfeggio Mandala Activation Guides and Meditation deck, which I personally find really fascinating. She also creates healing art with a conscious heart from her visions during meditation. This is her way of connecting with the divine and assisting humanity to do the same and recognize the divine within ourselves and others. Today will be part one, where Susan will share her near-death experiences, and I will ask her some questions about those. Check back tomorrow for part two, where we will go deeper into a Q&A about the angels themselves, what they are, what she sees, how to connect with them. Check my description box for Susan's website, where you can see samples of her paintings and get in touch with her, as well as a link to her Facebook. Thank you guys so much for watching. Here's Susan. Hi, Susan. Thank you so much for being with me today. I am really excited to talk to you.
Oh, thanks for having me. Yeah, I'm really honored that you reached out to me.
I'm really honored that you've agreed to come and share with us today. Would you like to start out by just sharing your near-death experiences? You had two as a child, correct?
Yes, one at 4 and a second one at the age of 6.
Okay.
Um, the there really wasn't a lot of difference between the two experiences. The first one, I remember like laying on the couch, and apparently I had a very high fever. And I just remember the blanket being so heavy that it was like too heavy for me to even move. This was, the early 60s, in rural Iowa. So the doctor actually came to the house, which I know is like unheard of anymore, but it did still happen occasionally at the time. And I remember that my parents and the doctor went to the next room, and then the next thing I know, it's like I'm looking down at them, and they're talking about if they're going to take me to our local hospital, which was 15 minutes away, or if we were going to go to Iowa City, to the university hospital, which was a little over an hour away.
Okay.
From the medical records, I can tell that they must have taken me at this particular time to the local hospital. But yeah, at that time, it's like I was gone. I went to this best way I can describe it is this beautiful, think of the most beautiful park you can ever imagine, with, there were wildflowers and just like little animals running around everywhere. And there were these just massive trees that were so tall that even the angels that were probably 15 to 18 feet tall couldn't even reach the branches. So now knowing what the redwoods, forest looks like, I think it was similar to that, but the trees were spaced apart farther. Um, and it's like these three, beings, three angels introduced themselves to me, and one of them actually, I think, would almost look like he, went down on one knee, is the best way I can describe it. But I don't remember seeing things like hands and feet and knees, and I didn't even see faces.
Mm-hmm.
There was just these glowing beings of light. But this one then spoke to me, though it wasn't verbal. It was, like I heard it in my head. So it was telepathic. And they really just asked me if I wanted to see the world through the eyes of the animals.
Mm-hmm.
And from that, I went from it, and I don't even remember which one was first, to be honest, but it was kind of like going from a mouse to a rabbit to a snake and, turtle, and just first it was animals I was very familiar with growing up on a farm. And then then I went into the water where I was, in fish, and then it just seemed like it kept getting larger and larger until I think I was in probably a blue whale, or a being, a creature of that size anyway. And then and I was just swimming in the ocean and just so enjoying that. And even now today, that's where I go to feel grounded, is to the water. But then I wasn't swimming in water anymore. It's like I was swimming in space. And from there, then saw this kind of almost like this big screen opened up, and I was watching all these beings come from like this central source of light. So it's almost like souls were being like created, is the best way I can describe it. And seemed to be going to different places. And it's like somehow I knew I was headed to the angelic realms. But me, myself, and two other beings, two other souls, it's like we were pulled off to the side, and we were asked to be and the word they used was planet creator. Now, I don't fully understand what that means, but that's what that was the words they used. And then they like showed us, on smaller screens, kind of what the world would be like if we did, and what the world would be like if we did not. And it's like these two other beings, they went on to the angelic realms. I obviously didn't.
Mhm.
But and the next thing I remember, I'm waking up in the hospital. My second one at 6, really the biggest thing that was different was before I got to play with the animals again. I was curious about stuff I was being taught in Sunday school,
Mhm.
because I was always asking questions. Things just didn't make sense to me. And so I was asking questions about, and I don't remember the specific questions that I asked. I remember more their responses. And it's again like they opened up this big massive screen, and were showing me, first I remember kind of a question of something like, where they came from and where their home was. And it was almost like seeing a skyscraper, but it's like each level was made out of something different, but there were no walls. There was no actual like side to it. It's like I could see into all these layers.
Mm.
And it's like the higher you went, the more transparent the beings were. Um, and in some of them, it's like, the floor, like what we would think of as the floors. So, one might only be, off in the distance be this high, but the next one was, this high. So the heights were different too. When I was, asking about things like, Jesus and Mary Magdalene and stuff, and they showed me more of a very tight-knit family group, but they did not appear in any way that they were lacking in anything that, because a lot of times about Jesus, we're taught that he grew up, nobody uses the word poor, but they kind of insinuate that.
Yeah.
And this did not seem that way at all. They seemed like a very, very wealthy family, but very close and very tight knit.
Mhm.
And seemed to call his sister Mary. So I wonder if Mary Magdalene and him were, like they almost appeared to be, the way it showed to me, I think of them as like they were half brother and sister.
Don't know if you're familiar with Dolores Cannon, but she did between life regression. And
Mhm.
don't quote me on this, but I seem to remember her saying that Jesus and Mary Magdalene were related in some way, or very close in some way. Not romantically like some people assume, but
Mhm. Yeah, and I don't know for sure on that still. Yeah, it's like some of the pictures I was shown that makes sense, and other pictures it doesn't.
Mhm.
So yeah, and I know that I've even heard, because Jesus was actually a very common name at that time. So it could be very easily that they mixed up stories about, multiple people
Mm.
that went by that name.
Mhm. Well, that's really fascinating. Do you remember any of the other questions that you asked?
Not specifically, one of the questions that I know got me in trouble a lot in Sunday school after that was I was always asking how long God's day was, because God was just felt so much bigger to me. So it didn't make sense that his days were as small as ours. And it's like I kept asking this question in Sunday school, and it's like I remember more than once being asked to go join my parents in church.
Wow, that's so sad. All right, so you asked them these questions and then it proceeded with the experience like it had the previous time?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Pretty much they didn't, it's like I just went from animal to animal then, for the rest of the duration of that experience. Um, I do remember waking up in the hospital after this one, and one of my grandmothers was sitting there with me, and she didn't know I was awake yet. She was sitting there reading National Geographic, and it's the one that had the Giza Plateau on it. And I, just blurted out, "Well, where's the rest of them?" And it's interesting that even now, just here in the last couple of years, they've actually found foundations to more smaller pyramids there on the plateau.
Wow, that's fascinating. So had you seen them in one of your experiences or you just had a
It could
knowing?
be, but I don't recall it.
Uh-huh.
Could it also been, that I was more open to connecting to past life memories at that moment too?
Mhm.
That's a possibility. To be honest, I'm not sure.
Okay. Could I ask you a couple questions about your experiences?
Of course.
So when you were experiencing the consciousness of the different animals, did you have their consciousness? Like, could you see things from their perspective?
I saw the world from their perspective, but it's like I still had my knowledge, but I understood what they felt, why I was
Okay,
present with them.
that is so interesting. From that experience, would you say that animals are more intelligent than we think they are?
Some yes, some no. Um, I They seem to have a very simple understanding, but I think it's because they function more on instinct than logic like we do.
When you had your near-death experience and you saw the light beings like proceeding out of the light. I heard you in another experience refer to that as like the great breath or something like that. Do you think that
Yeah,
was the creation?
I suspect, that I think there's been multiple creations.
Okay.
There wasn't just one. It's like almost, yeah. But like I said earlier, I think because, when I was talking about how much bigger God felt, what we think of as God creator, whatever word you want to use, um, so much bigger. It's almost the breaths are like much slower than ours are.
Mm.
But there isn't just one exhale. Then there's an inhale where some things are drawn back in, and then another exhale. But who knows how long it is between each of those breaths.
Oh, that is fascinating. So we're God's breath, like he breathes us out and then we evolve back towards God and he
Yeah,
breathes us
that's
in.
my understanding.
Oh, that's beautiful. You mentioned that the angels didn't have features or faces, and I've heard this said before. Nancy Rhines said the same thing, and there's a couple of
Mhm.
others. And sometimes I'll get comments where people will say, "Well, if they didn't have faces, then how can you trust them?" But I I also have like some pre-birth memories, and I remember being around light beings, and that just resonates so much to me because it's all light and it's all energy, right?
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
the face is something that we have in this form, but it's not something they need there, right? Because you can know each other on a deeper level. Does that
Mhm.
resonate with you, or what are
Oh,
your thoughts on
definitely.
that?
Definitely. Yeah, and the form that and saw them in during my near-death experiences is how I continue to see them today. And it was, for years it was just my own that I saw.
Hmm.
And it wasn't and actually until later that I started seeing everybody else's.
Okay, well, tell us about that. When you came back, you started seeing your own angels, and then how did your story progress from there?
Yeah, I was just able to see them and communicate with them all the time. Though, yeah, they're kind of like people. Some of them are very talkative, some are not. Some, most time they prefer to communicate with me. It's more like by showing me just a flash of a picture.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, and it was just like that, for many, many years. And yeah, I, to be honest, didn't really think anything of it. I almost, at starting such a young age, I kind of thought everybody could see these things. And yeah, and I would always try and tell the stories and explain what I experienced to my parents. Yeah, and if you can imagine, mid-60s Iowa farming community, um, yeah, and we were the type of family we went to church every Sunday. Yeah, at the Lutheran church that my family had been going to since the 1850s. They actually came over from Germany with some other families to start this particular church.
Okay.
So, it was pretty strict. Um, but so yeah, it didn't go well when I tried to explain because the term near-death experience didn't even exist yet. And of course, as it being as young as I was, I didn't really have the words to share my experience. I would say, things more like, when I was a snake, when I was, and trying to explain what I felt and saw. And, after a while, it was, quit telling those stories. And, so I just quit telling the stories. I
Mhm.
just quit talking about my experiences. I didn't quit, stop seeing and experiencing what was going on around me. But then, jumping forward to 1997, and it was in January, I realized, and I kind of noticed I was feeling the presence of more angels, but I really, as a stay-at-home mom at that particular time, didn't think a lot of it until I went to the grocery store. And that was so overwhelming. I literally left the cart in the middle of the store and went home.
Wow.
See, all of a sudden and I could tell by like strings or threads kind of which angel went with which person. But I was like in this, I'm all of a sudden seeing, 15, 18 foot, 20 foot tall beings with every single person. And so I went home and and I wasn't able to sit down and meditate right away because I had 4 children by then, 2 teenage boys and 2 toddlers. So I was a little busy. But from when as soon as I was able to sit down and meditate, it's like, okay, what's going on here? What am I supposed to do this? Yeah, all those kind of questions that all would flood all of our minds at that time. And I got the very clear message from my personal angels that I was supposed to find a way to paint or draw what I was seeing. And to be honest, I argued for like the next 6 months. Yeah, why me? There's got to be somebody better. There's somebody that's
Mhm.
not as busy as I am. Yeah, something. And they just wouldn't let go of it. And it's like, no, you're the one that's supposed to do this. You chose to do this. So I started playing with different mediums, first watercolor, That did not, for anybody that's worked with watercolor, no, that is a lifetime study to really
Yeah.
master watercolor. And still, most people still don't. But so that didn't go well. So then I went to pastels, and I used pastels for probably the first couple of years. And I was even using very large paper, like 18 by 24. So they were huge. But yeah, and I didn't always even see them in the full form that I do now. Sometimes I would just see a profile
Mm.
or different things. Sometimes I would just see like one massive, what we would call wing. Did a married couple once, and it was interesting how their wings, they weren't exactly alike, but they matched in some way that when you put the two of them together, it looked like a butterfly.
Wow.
And that ended up being very significant to them, because something had happened on their very first date with butterflies.
Oh, wow.
So that was very significant for them. But anyway, then eventually, because I wasn't getting the detail that I wanted with the pastels, I moved to color pencil, which is still what I use today, and smaller paper. But um, yeah, and really from there, it's just been practicing, doing it more and more because being as my kids grew up, I would just do it, like 2 or 3 Saturdays a month, or 2, 3 Saturdays a year, I'm sorry, at one of the local metaphysical shops that I was already friends with the owner.
Mhm.
And then it's when the kids grew up, I started doing a few metaphysical fairs and things like that. And then 8 years ago now, yeah, it's 8 years ago, I've started doing it. I'm now full time,
That's amazing.
and still doing a few fairs. Now doing Zoom. That was, something I added in January or March of last year.
Okay.
But
I,
yeah, before that, first they taught me kind of how to. I did it from photograph first, when I wasn't able to be present with somebody,
mhm.
and found that as long as I could see their eyes and it was a recent photograph, I still kind of used like my angels to ask their angels, for permission, through that tech, and only one time in all these years have I had somebody say, the angels say no.
Okay. Well, that is an incredible story to me. I'd love to ask you a few questions about the angels and then maybe a few about your work.
Sure.